Mr. President, since I gave a privileged speech last week, I'll just take excerpts of my speech and read it into the records as my sponsorship measure. Mr. President, last week, the whole nation was shocked to see on our TV screens the incident of terrorism and rebellion in the heartland of Mindanao in Marawi City, where, as we speak, lives are still being lost and innocent people are taken against their will. As a senator from Mindanao, I'm appalled and indignant with the brazen manner that this Maute group, this group of terrorists, have occupied certain buildings and installations in the city, burned some buildings, and terrorized not only the people of Marawi, but even the adjoining provinces and cities. Yesterday, we had a briefing by the Secretary of National Defense and the NSA, National Security Advisor, both Secretaries Lorenzana and Secretary June Esperon. And yesterday, they showed us a grim picture of what these terrorists want to happen to us in Mindanao by setting up a wilayat or a caliphate, joining Indonesia, Malaysia, and Mindanao as one in the delivery of these areas for the Daesh or the ISIS. It showed us that almost all terrorist groups now have united as one to fight for the Daesh or the ISIS to set up this caliphate. And therefore, Mr. President, enough is enough. This group has just pushed back the gains we have achieved in the aspect of the peace process with the secessionist groups and for the economic development of Mindanao. We have taken great strides to bring development in Mindanao and pursue inclusive growth for our people, and this incident has brought us a step backward. I believe we should rally behind the President, Mr. President. This is a time for unity and courage. We should rally behind our troops like how we rallied for them during the SAF 44 Mama Sapono incident. We should show our people and the whole world that the Philippines is no place for terrorists. We have to use all constitutional means to suppress lawlessness and, once and for all, eradicate terrorism from our land without disregarding the paramount safety of the civilian population. We should fully support the AFP and PNP in fighting and neutralizing these terrorists and place them before the bar of law. These terrorists should fully account for the man-made disaster they are creating and the miseries they are causing the people of Marawi City and the rest of Mindanao. As a senator from Mindanao, I fully understand the President's frustration in dealing with the armed groups across all regions. We should take this as a chance to finally disarm them and deal with their sympathizers from some LGUs coddling these terrorists. With the declaration of martial law in Mindanao, it is hoped that any threat to national security and public safety will be neutralized. If we don't eliminate these terrorists, we shall lose the gains, Mr. President, that we have achieved for inclusiveness and religious tolerance that we have been working for so many years, together with the Senate President Pimentel, and Senator Manny Pacquiao, who've been pushing for this for many years. I hope one day, Mr. President, we can have a multiracial, multi-faith society, such as Singapore and Malaysia. These societies have prospered out of the productive economic, political, and social and peaceful coexistence of Muslims with people of other religions. Sabah, for example, has a Christian governor leading a Muslim-dominated state. Singapore, the busiest trading and financial center in Southeast Asia, is very multiracial, multi-faith society. Remarkably, both these societies flourish under a strong rule of law. The law is applied equally across all faiths. I believe, Mr. President, that Islam is a faith of peace. I have many Muslim friends, not only friends, but staff. Half of my staff are my Muslim brothers and sisters, who I consider sisters and brothers living in these areas. They don't share the extremist ideology of these terrorists. We know that a vast majority of Muslims do not like what is happening in Marawi right now. They also do not want the contagion to spread to other city centers like Iligan and Cagayan de Oro City, Davao or Zamboanga City. As a Mindanaoan, I know majority of our Muslim brothers and sisters want to achieve peace in their lifetime. So do we, Mr. President, their Christian neighbors. They don't want, and we don't want, our children and grandchildren to cower in fear of terrorists as what is happening rather now in Marawi and what has happened in Ipil and Zamboanga City. From these sieges, we should have learned our lesson. I would like to also highlight the number of our Muslim brothers and sisters who helped save so many of our Christian brothers in this conflict. Today, the story that really lifted my spirit up was from the owners of these 2 stores in Marawi, whose staff were Christians. And when they were asked by the ISIS to open the gates because they wanted to get these Christian workers of theirs, ang sabi po ng 2 babae na may-ari ng mga store na yan, patayin niyo muna kami bago niyo kunin ang aming mga kapatid na Christian. We have to highlight this, Mr. President, to show that we should live together as one. We believe in each other. Mr. President, let us finish this menace once and for all. Thus, this representation stands behind the President, our Commander-in-Chief, in his declaration of martial law for Mindanao. May God bless the people of Mindanao, and may God bless the Philippines. Maraming salamat, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Senator Hontiveros wishes to be recognized, Mr. President.
Senator Hontiveros is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and Majority Leader. Would the good sponsor yield to some questions?
Yes, I would be honored, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Article 7, Section 18 of the 1987 Constitution reads that the Congress, voting jointly, by a vote of at least a majority of all its members in regular or special session, may revoke such proclamation or suspension, which revocation shall not be set aside by the President. Is it the position of the good sponsor, Mr. President, that this resolution would validly substitute the requirement of a joint session?
Mr. President, to the distinguished colleague, I am not a lawyer, but in my layman's understanding of Section 18, and I've read it countless of times, baliktarin mo pa kung ano-ano pang anggulo, napakasimple nakalagay dito. The President shall be the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and whenever it becomes necessary, he may call out such armed forces to prevent or suppress lawless violence, invasion or rebellion, invasion or rebellion, period. In case of invasion or rebellion, when public safety requires it, he may, for a period not exceeding 60 days, suspend the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus or place the Philippines or any part thereof under martial law. Mr. President, it goes on by saying, within 48 hours from the proclamation of martial law or the suspension of the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus, the President shall submit a report in person or in writing to Congress. The Congress, voting jointly by a vote of at least a majority of all its members in regular or special session, may revoke such proclamation or suspension, which revocation shall not be set aside by the President. Mr. President, I have with me the minutes of the Constitutional Commission that was convened for the 1987 declaration. No other than Commissioner Christian Monsod was the author of the amendment to remove the affirmation needed for the 60-day ruling. It's right here with me, Mr. President. I have it right here, and I quote, I believe that at least for the first 60 days, which is a time fuse for it automatically expires at the end of 60 days, we should at least give the President the flexibility to act in cases of invasion or rebellion. So, Mr. President, and it was carried, that amendment was carried. In the debates of the 1987 Constitutional Commission, it was revealed that it was the intent of the body to adopt a non-interference policy of the presidential prerogative of declaring martial law for a period of 60 days. The joint session is required only if Congress deems it necessary to revoke or extend martial law, but not for concurrence. This is the essence of the Monsod Amendment adopted by the 1987 Constitutional Commission and as reflected by the current wording of Section 18, Article 7 of the Constitution. So, Mr. President, my understanding of that, we don't need concurrence. Mr. President, only for revocation. That is my understanding. I'm only one of 24 senators.
With the permission
Thank
of the
you.
gentleman and the lady, Senator Escudero wants to be recognized.
Mr. President,
Senator
as one of the
Escudero.
authors of the proposed amendment to the resolution, if I may answer the distinguished lady directly, the resolution does not even make mention of whether or not we should convene. It simply expresses the sense of the Senate insofar as its revocation or non-revocation is concerned. As I understand, we will be taking up another resolution filed by Senators Drilon, Aquino, Pangilinan, Trillanes, and Hontiveros, which will deal squarely on that particular issue on whether or not we should convene for whatever reason or purpose. Thank you, Mr. President. Just a point of information.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the good gentleman from Sorsogon for the point of information. Nonetheless, I rose to interpellate the sponsorship of the good sponsor of Senate Resolution 388. So, in response to the response of the good gentleman from Bukidnon, we also had occasion to refer to the record of the Constitutional Commission in order to ascertain the intent of the framers in Section 18, Article 7. In the debate as to whether a majority concurrence or a two-third concurrence is required, so please note the use of the word concurrence, not just revocation. It was stated that, quote, "This creates a very dangerous situation in the country, and the enemies of the state may try to prevent members of the Congress from attending a session just to prevent a two-thirds concurrence in the declaration of martial law." So it was also contemplated not only to revoke but also to concur. I continue, that is the reason that this section requires only a majority concurrence. Records of the Constitutional Commission, pages 386 to 387. Clearly, Mr. President, if it was anticipated that there might be a risk of enemies of the state preventing members from attending Congress, what is contemplated is a physical session, not just a mere exchange of resolutions. The Monsod Amendment says that concurrence is not required to trigger martial law, but joint session is still required at a reasonable time. And if I would be allowed to refresh the memory of the good gentleman from Bukidnon, in 2009, in the discussions in our Senate on this very question, the good gentleman from Bukidnon said, and I quote, "Ito po, joint session, ay isang constitutional duty natin. Hindi po natin pwedeng hindi bigyan ng pansin itong joint session na ito dahil it will become bad precedents. Think about the future administration." I am sure the good gentleman from Bukidnon will recall his prophetic statement on the floor at that time, Mr. President. And so I return to my question, which it seems from the records of the CONCOM deliberations remains relevant. Does the Senate Resolution 388 mean that no joint session will be called, whether before or after the end of session, Mr. President?
Yeah. Because at that time, Mr. President, may I be allowed to answer? At that time, I was for revocation for that martial law declaration. I erred in my decision at that time. People make mistakes. If we run after these people with the full force of the law, maybe this would not have been this grave today. And now, I have seen the light. We've seen the briefing yesterday, we've heard the briefing yesterday. This is the first time that a key Filipino city has been taken over by the terrorists. Until now, they have not cleared it fully. Let's reverse the situation, Mr. President. Marami tayo na nakikinig dito na yan. Kung nangyari yan sa City of Manila and there were 100 sleeper cells, members of sleeper cells, taking over the City Hall of Manila, and the fighting hasn't ended for 1 week, do you think we'll be debating about this now? About revocation or not? You think the Filipino people, lalo na sa NCR, they will be appalled, indignant of what has happened. Again, I will tell the good lady, I erred in my decision before. Because now I realize the gravity of the situation. This is happening in my homeland of Mindanao, our homeland of Mindanao, Senate President. As I mentioned yesterday, not too long ago, the bombing in Cagayan de Oro, which killed over 20 people, or just a little under 20 people. A good friend of mine passed away there. Board member Lagbas, who's may kinakapatid. We feel it every day. We feel this every day. So you have to know, you have to understand the passion of this representation. That enough is enough. And we feel that this president, who's from Mindanao, understands the situation on the ground, and that we should give him the leeway to do his mandate to protect the people of Mindanao.
Mr. President,
That's my position.
I understand and respect the passion of the gentleman from Bukidnon, but though his opinion may have changed, the Constitution has not. So do I take it that the answer to my first question is that this resolution would validly substitute the requirement of a joint session, that no joint session will be called whether before or after the end of session? Mr. President?
Mr. President.
If I may be allowed, because there are several authors of the resolution, all distinguished members of the bar.
Yes.
And I think if they may be allowed to answer
Yes.
also as sponsors of the resolution.
If there is no objection from those who have the floor, then I will recognize Senator Escudero.
Thank you, Mr.
Senator
President.
Escudero,
Mr. President,
recognized.
earlier I raised a point of information that was not objected to by the sponsor, that this matter pertains to whether or not the sense of the Senate would be in favor of revocation or non-revocation. As I said earlier, the matters being raised by the distinguished lady pertains to whether or not we will convene, and we will go to that. And quite frankly, I am eagerly awaiting the arguments that will be raised, because we have our individual positions on whether or not we should convene the joint session. And as I said, if I may reiterate, without the objection or violent protestations of Senator Zubiri, that this resolution will not in any way impinge or affect our decision with respect to the resolution filed by the distinguished lady and her colleagues in the minority with respect to whether or not we should convene. Because at that time, perhaps, it would be the lady or our minority leader answering questions pertaining to whether or not we would convene. Just to abbreviate and organize our discussions, Mr. President, so that we can dispose of this resolution insofar as whether or not we want to revoke it, without affecting our constitutional duty to convene or not to convene, and then take that up when we take up the resolution filed mostly by members of the minority. Thank you, Mr. President. I hope, and I would like to thank the distinguished lady and the gentleman also from Bukidnon for sharing me the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Please proceed, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. And again, to the good gentleman from Sorsogon, I share in his wish to reasonably abbreviate and make more organized this interpellation. And if the good gentleman from Bukidnon would allow, I just have about 5 more very direct questions.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you
Mr.
very
President.
much,
No
Mr.
problem.
President, and to the good gentleman. So I'm proceeding from, based on the substantive responses, I take it to mean that the good sponsor is accepting that, or is answering in the affirmative that it is his opinion that this resolution substitutes the requirement of a joint session.
No, Mr. President, we're
No.
still going to discuss that. As a
All
matter
right,
of
Mr.
fact,
President, then.
we're going to debate on that still.
Thank
Your
you,
resolution.
Mr. President.
What's the pleasure of Senator Gordon?
Mr. President, just as a point of clarification and information.
Go ahead, sir.
May I reply to all the statements, Mr.
Mr.
President?
Just
Since-
one brief
Okay.
to...
I will defer to the
Okay,
lady.
Thank you to
Senator
the good
Hontiveros, go
gentleman
ahead.
from Zambales. Mr. President, hindi po tama na hindi maaaring pumasok sa isang joint session ang mga AFP o kahit sino pong opisyal na imbitahin ng Kongreso sitting in joint session. Maalala po ninyo na noong 2009, may mga AFP officials na inimbita at nagsalita doon sa joint session. Ang issue noon ay bakit wala si dating Pangulong Macapagal Arroyo, pero mayroon pong AFP officials. Naalala ko po, Mr. President, dahil nandun po ako bilang miyembro ng House of Representatives. Maraming salamat po, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Senator Zubiri, yes sir, go ahead.
yeah, Mr. President, I can clearly recall, I was majority floor leader then, and your father was the minority leader. And I want to put this on record because I'm sure baka magka-fake news na naman, lalabas na naman to sa social media. I was schooled by Senator Risa on my position in 2009. Sigurado, kasi ganun yun eh. Labanan ng social media ito eh. So I want to put this on record. Okay? At that time, majority of the senators, I clearly recall, were for the revocation. That was the sense of the Senate, to revoke. So we wanted a joint session at that time,
Noong time na yun.
Mr. President, to revoke the martial law declaration of Gloria Macapagal, former President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. But things have changed, and I've said, now it's different. We've had a briefing today, yesterday, and we saw the situation on the ground, and it has tremendously deteriorated from 2009. So that is my position. Para at least may kulatilya. 2009, ayaw namin, gusto namin na revocation. But nagkamali tayo, nagkagrabe-grabe, nagkaleche-leche na eh. Can I use that? Is that parliamentary language? You may erase that if you want to take it out of the records. Pero sa totoo lang, nagkagatas-gatas na ang sitwasyon. Again, you saw the videos yesterday. I don't want to say any more information because it will jeopardize military intelligence, it will jeopardize the operations being done by the military. But we saw it yesterday. We saw the videos of their planning sessions. What else do we need? What else? They wanted to come to the shores of Metro Manila. I do not want what is happening to my area of Mindanao to happen to the Visayas or to Luzon. That is my appeal as a Mindanaoan. Mr. President.
Mr. President, no one is schooling anyone. The good gentleman from Bukidnon knows how I respect him as a peer. I received the advice of the gentleman from Zambales and from Sorsogon, not feeling that either of them were schooling me. Para po sa akin, Mr. President, yung mga salitang sinabi natin noon ay nananatiling mahalaga sa habang panahon, especially when we are faced with making a decision about similar situations later in the future. So that is all I wish to say, Mr. President. No one is schooling anyone. Lahat po tayo ay ini-interpellate o sinosponsor ang ating mga resolusyon kasi gusto natin na tuparin ng Senado at ng buong Kongreso ang ating tungkulin, batay sa ating pagkaunawa. With all due respect sa pagkakaiba-iba ng mga opinyon, pero nagkakaisa dun sa paghahanap kung kakayanin natin ng pagkakaisa ng posisyon sa mahahalagang isyung ito. And I just would like to repeat in closing, Mr. President, na wag po tayong matatakot mag-joint session gaya ng isusponsor mamaya ng aming minority resolution at wag naman po sanang tayo mismo pa ang magpadlak ng sarili nating Senado. Maraming salamat, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Mr.
just a
President.
quick rejoinder, Mr. President. With all due respect to my colleague, I was not saying that she was going to school me or school her. I was just saying people from trolls from social media. I'm not saying that it is her. I have my highest respects for the Honorable Lady Senator. I was saying, my passion, as you can see, my passion is not directed to the minority. My passion is, and my anger is directed to the kalaban. Not them. They're my friends, as far as I'm concerned. But, Mr. President, I do not agree with her, though, on the position that I took before. Because in 2004, I voted against the removal of the death penalty. I was one of 24 that wanted to retain the death penalty. And now I am with her, against the death penalty. So there are times, Mr. President, in the politician, public servant's life, we see the light. We make enlightened judgment calls later on. So
President.
we can agree to disagree, but definitely on this issue, forgive me for my passion kasi kami po ang apektado. Maraming salamat.